And good afternoon, everybody. It looks like we are live. I just need to check that you're picking up the feed on Teams. Should be popping through any second now, I hope. And there we are. Brilliant. Right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. It's my very, very real pleasure to welcome back to Stowe, albeit virtually. And I'm in a slightly different. In fact, I think we're both in slightly different studios this time around. But big friend of the school. This is Alasdair Wilde, and he's come today to talk to you about St Andrews, yes, and Scottish universities in general, yes, but also this is everything you need to know about applying to university in Scotland and indeed elsewhere. So that's probably about it from me. I know that Alasdair has got a presentation. I'll just bring that up there. I'm going to duck out, but I'll be here moderating the questions as they come through. Alasdair, if I get anything interesting, I'll pop in. But otherwise, you know the drill. It's over to you. Thank you very much indeed. And thanks again for taking the time to come and speak to us today. Over to you, Alasdair.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to my sort of talk on hopefully everything applying Scotland and St Andrews as well at the end. My name's Alasdair. I'm an education liaison officer at the university. And just a little bit of background about me is that I did my undergraduate and postgraduate both at St Andrews. Loved it so much I didn't want to leave and join the admissions department here as well. So hopefully this presentation will go in roughly 3 parts, and it will have a bit at the beginning about applying to university in general, some things to start thinking about, tips and tricks and all of these kind of things. I'll have a brief bit about what it's like to study in Scotland, perhaps that's a little bit different than in England or other parts of the world, and then finish off by talking about St Andrews and everything to do with it here as well. So first things first, when you're thinking about university, the number one thing that I always like to recommend and sort of should be at the forefront of your mind is, what do you enjoy? Now, that could be subjects that you're already studying, something that you've always wanted to study, but don't just immediately think, this is what's going to earn me the big bucks, or this is, what I'm expected to study. This is what I've been thinking about. Really do think about what you're going to enjoy the most. If you're coming to Scotland, it's going to be 4 years, England, perhaps 3 years. If you end up liking it so much that you do a postgraduate degree, it could be 8 years by the time you're all done, sort of all told. So you're going to be investing a lot of time into your education if you're coming to university. So it really has to be something that you're going to be able to enjoy throughout. And with that comes the very fact that, there are a variety of different pathways. There are apprenticeships and other sort of graduate, school graduate routes that you can go directly into employment for as well. So it's not just university that you should be considering. Think about all of your different options and weigh them up. And certainly university can definitely open a lot of doors. So, university is, no small part of something that you should be considering, but don't just immediately do away with all of the other pathways. Really do have a think about everything going forward and go from there. So research with all of this is the key word. Think about all of the different courses that you might want to do, all of the different course content. Is there something specifically that you really like? You might think, I might want to study English, but in fact, it might be more towards creative writing that you really enjoy. So really do think about the sort of course content and the specific courses as well, of course, as well as the minimum entry requirements too. And with all of this research, you'll come up, hopefully, with a short list of different courses and hopefully universities that are right for you. So the first thing, again, that I would like to emphasize is definitely do your research, and in these sort of uncertain times, attend virtually as many open days, visiting days as you possibly can. Range of universities are putting on events throughout the year. Oftentimes, these will give you the opportunity to speak to academics, to speak to different departments, maybe music or sport, chaplaincy, whatever it might be around the university as well, and really get a feel for the universities that you're thinking about. So definitely would absolutely encourage you to attend as many of those as possible. And hopefully, fingers crossed, when things get back a bit more normal, I'd always encourage you to visit them in person as well when it's safe and appropriate to do so. So there's a variety of different things to sort of think about when you're looking at different universities. And the first thing that many students come across when they're looking at courses is to go straight to the league tables and have a look at them. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. And there are a variety of different rankings that you can look at, and you can see some of them on screen here. And these can be a really useful starting point if you're thinking of going to, the top university, or you're looking at going to where has the best social life or the best academic experience or graduate outcomes, all of these kind of things. Rankings can be a really useful first step. But definitely there are some other things to take into consideration as well, such as a variety of different awards. Each year there's a student satisfaction survey that's given out to all graduates. And that can be a really good indication of, on another bit of, ranking wise, what a university is like. But equally, there are things like the teaching excellence framework, and also different groups that universities might belong to, such as Russell Group. But it's not just the university that makes things competitive. Courses can be competitive too. So in some cases it might be because they're government controlled, such as medicine, dentistry, or veterinary medicine. But equally it might just be that some universities are quite unique in offering certain types of subjects. So if you're looking at doing brewing or airport management, there really are a small handful of universities that offer these courses, and that by its very definition means that those courses are going to be quite competitive. But equally, there are also larger trends that make subjects more competitive too. So ever since sort of Dolly the sheep, genetics has seen a large boom, such as international relations since 2001, and all of the things in the media and the news about Tesla, SpaceX, Bitcoin, you name it, computer science and technology is on an absolute upward trajectory path too. If things are mentioned in TV, film, social media, all of these things can influence the competitiveness of a course. So it's not just as easy to say as, oh, that university is very highly ranked, that course is going to be competitive. Or that university is less highly ranked in this regard, maybe it will be easier to get in. All of these things, there's a variety of different things to take into consideration that might make a course more competitive. But there are a few things that you can do to sort of best prepare yourself during this application process in terms of exams. And research is the thing I'm always going to come back to. The more you can look at universities, the more you can attend open days, look at all of the different courses and really have a good think about what you enjoy the most. All are going to be the absolute foundation blocks of your application journey. So one of the things that perhaps sounds quite obvious to consider is, what are the minimum entry requirements for the course, and are you likely to meet them? If the answer is yes, that's a big tick. If the answer is maybe not, that's maybe optimistic, or perhaps there's this other university, this other course, this other subject that you can look at. You always do have to be realistic when you're looking at your application. Now, that's not to say don't be aspirational, don't put yourself down, but generally if you're predicted a certain grade and the minimum entry grades are sort of many higher, then that's something that you might want to consider when you're looking at that process. But equally, it's not just UCAS, it's not just the simple application. In some cases, there is additional testing for courses in university as well. So again, just make sure you're looking at your research, looking at what is required of you when you're applying. So if you're looking at medicine, it might be that you're looking at the UCAT. If you're looking at law, you might need to do the LNAT. Oxbridge often have additional testing that you might have to do as well. But a variety of other universities are a sort of wider variety are asking for supplementary testing and otherwise. So definitely, again, look at the specific courses and look what you're required to supply, so you're not taken off guard when you're going through the application process. One thing that's worth noting in these slightly unusual circumstances as well is work experience and its role. Quite often, a question I'll get asked is, I've been unable to do work experience this year because of the circumstances. And the best advice I can give is don't panic. Where you can find work experience online or virtual internships and these types of things, great. But universities aren't completely oblivious to everything that you're going through at the moment. We know that it's going to be tricky to source some work experience in the current circumstances. So don't panic too much if it's been difficult to source that. I'll come on to it a bit later in terms of the personal statement, but it's enough to say at the moment, just really do think and consider all of the other things that you've been getting up to, that you've been engaging in, or even at this stage, what could you be doing in these current circumstances with current restrictions outside of work experience, be it sort of online courses, listening to podcasts, reading outside the subject area, these types of things. But I'll come on to that in a slightly more detail in just a moment. And again, I will come on to the personal statement, but with even just the word there, drafting your personal statement, don't leave it till the last minute. It is always worth mentioning. Draft, and redraft. Always take your time and create it over a period. Don't rush into it. So in terms of the application, there are three main things that you'll need to be thinking about: your grades, your personal statement, and teacher's reference, with, of course, the caveat that some other universities will require extra testing and interviews and things like that. But I'm going to start with the personal statement, and no doubt you'll have heard some of this before, but I'm just going to quickly reiterate it because it really can be useful when you're sort of thinking about your next steps, what to start thinking about, and thinking about the personal statement even at this early stage is amazing. So it does comprise 1/3 of your application. So definitely don't skimp on the personal statement. Take your time, think about it in a lot of detail, and spend time crafting the perfect personal statement as much as possible. Don't spend all of your time studying to get the best grades possible and then write a really naff personal statement on the end. It really is a focal point in a lot of ways of personal statements. And it really can, it's in its name. It sounds cliche, but it is a personal statement. It's there for you to demonstrate to universities across the board, why you're special. Why do you enjoy your subject? Why do you want to take it? And what enjoyment do you get out of it? And the more personal that you can make this, the better. With that, you really do need to make sure, wherever possible, that you have a clear commitment to your subject. Really, the least competitive personal statements that, as a representative for the university that I've read, are oftentimes where I can see that they've applied for one subject and written about something completely different. It's at this sort of stage that you then start to realize, from the university's point of view, that we're probably not their first choice, or they haven't read and done their research adequately on the course. And it makes for a really really uncompelling personal statement where there isn't that commitment to the subject they're applying for. So that equally translates onto the joint degree aspect as well. If you are applying for two different subjects, that can be quite tricky. So where possible, what are the common threads? What are the common themes that you can really pull out and knit together? And one way that you could do this might be to not mention the subject specifically by name, for example, if you're applying to a couple and you're sort of trying to bring them together. And how can you talk about them in these key themes, key terms, so as to not make it obvious, perhaps, to some universities if you're not applying to those subjects at them there. So in terms of the basics of what we're looking for, generally speaking, is that it must be clear and be really nicely structured with no grammar or spelling mistakes. And you must be able to express what you're trying to tell us very clearly. Now, that is most easily done by a 75-25 split, give or take. These are rough estimates in terms of that personal statement, where the majority of your statement is a very clear commitment to your subject area. So that could be, if you're writing about English, it could be 75% about English, why you really like it, why you want to study it at university, anything that you've read, anything that you've seen or heard or done that has really sparked your interest, and how have you specifically engaged with the subject. It is a personal statement after all. And equally including an indication that you know what to expect from the course at the university is quite a crucial point in a lot of ways. Again, I'll talk about it in just a moment, but one course at one university is not the same as a course at another university. So if you talk about something that you really enjoy and are looking forward to studying, and that isn't something that's offered at a particular university, then again, the admissions officer reading your application will find that personal statement less competitive. But again, cliche as it is, the more personal experience and personal touches that you can bring to your personal statement, the better. Again, the example I always come back to is that if the thing that has really sparked your passion is the core textbook that you've been learning from, then you and everyone else who've included that, which is going to be quite a lot of people applying, it's not as personal as it could be. What specifically has really driven you and made you so interested in the subject? That's things to focus on. So I've in terms of what to include, I've mostly gone over it. But again, just to reiterate, the passion, the engagement with the subject, and again, in these sort of unusual and sort of hard circumstances, you might be worrying and thinking, oh, it's been so much harder to get these experiences, be it work and work experience, internships, all of these types of things. But don't panic. You don't have to have these quite formal engagements. It can be something as simple as, I've listened to this podcast that I found and it really sparked my interest in XYZ, or I watched this documentary and it really stirred passion about this, so I went off and read XYZ, and from that I have learned ABC. All of these types of things that you can do in the current circumstances can be really quite compelling and equally really quite personal to you. And that always translates to the admissions officer reading your personal statement. The final 25% or so that I mentioned in that split should be for all your extra and co-curriculars that you've been taking part in. So it could be music, it could be sport, anything else that you like to enjoy hobbies-wise that you've been getting up to. And where possible, it's not always possible, where possible, what are some of the transferable skills and roles that you've learned from these? The example I like to give is that if you played saxophone and you've got grade 8 and you've been playing that for a while, that's wonderful and we like to hear it, but what have you learned as a result of that? It could be if you've been playing in an ensemble and you've been sort of the chair or lead, that you've learned leadership, or it could be you've learned dedication and through the honing of your craft for a while, all of these types of things. And that's transferable onto almost any hobby. So just broadly think about your co and extracurriculars and how they sort of knit nicely in terms of those skills that you can bring to university. And always be as positive and enthusiastic as possible. It's always really evident to us when we're reading a personal statement who's spent a lot of time drafting it, who's really gone out of their way to try and demonstrate to us as much as possible what they enjoy, why they want to take it, and that they're genuinely excited about coming to university to study their subject. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier. When you're applying to your subject, make sure it is something that you enjoy, because it makes all of the elements of the application process such as this so much easier as well. I've talked about what to include. Some things that you might want to consider avoiding really is a lack of in-depth awareness of your course. If you mention that you want to study physics and then you spend most of the time talking about maths, again, it doesn't come across quite as compelling. If you write down, if you're applying to St Andrews and you write, I really want to go to the University of Bath to study physics, and you've applied to do maths with us, again, immediately that's less compelling to us because you've named a subject that you're not applying to and you've named an institution that you're not applying to as well. You have 5 choices, and wherever possible, you have to try and appease all 5. And I know it's really tricky, but there are some easy things that you can do, such as if you're applying to multiple subjects, don't name one that you're not that you're applying to different ones, and don't name institutions that in general. That's always a good sort of rule of thumb. Again, equally on the point of, if you're applying to multiple subjects, don't specify the name in case other universities aren't as compelled because you're applying to a subject different, or you talk about a subject different to the one that you're talking about. If you're doing for a joint degree, make sure you do talk about both of your subjects or the key themes and things like that as well. If you're applying to French and English and you spend the whole time speaking about English, if we're looking at it from the French point of view, immediately that's less compelling because you haven't talked about it at all. So try wherever possible to talk about both. And all the rest of the things that you can see on screen are almost common sense and go without saying, but don't lie in the personal statement. Don't make unsubstantiated claims like, you're the #1 physicist in the entire world or whatever, things like that. Just don't do it. Avoid that at all costs, and much more focus on what makes you unique. So again, I won't spend too much time on it. This is really just going over and sort of hammering home the point, but do just think about what interests you, what do you want to learn, all of the different skills, and wherever possible, funnel all of that into that 75-25% framework, and you'll be on to a really compelling and good personal statement. So in terms of the application process itself, there's a few key things that I just want to sort of bring out in terms of handy tips and tricks and things just to keep in the back of your mind and to consider. So there is no national curriculum for higher education courses. And this really goes back to what I was saying earlier. English at St Andrews can be vastly different than English at other universities. So going back to that research point, have a look on all of the university websites and the courses. Most of the time, they'll give you an indicative module list, if not the actual module lists that previous students have taken in previous years. On these, it means that you can have a look at what are the modules in first and second year, what are the modules in third and perhaps in Scotland fourth year, what are your honours modules like? So if you're really, really interested in Shakespeare, for example, and the university you're applying to might not even have a module on Shakespeare, or vice versa, if you're looking at really modern literature, you might be applying to an English course that doesn't offer that. And the same is true of physics or chemistry, maths, you name it. All of the courses can be really wildly different. So please do just research and have a look at that. And even then, in the personal statement, it means that you can talk about quite specific things. If you know that all of 5 of your universities have a course on lasers, if you're applying to physics, or a module on Shakespeare, for example, you can talk about that in much greater detail, knowing that all 5 of your choices are going to include that as part of the courses on offer. And I know that it can be quite daunting to try and choose one subject. What do you want to apply for? That can be really a daunting prospect to pick out something and, study that for a little while. So if you are really unsure and you find yourself thinking, I'm going to apply to multiple subjects, then in that personal statement, as I said, don't mention the subject by name and try and pull out those common themes, because you do have that one personal statement that goes to all universities. In terms of the process as well, make sure that you do have a good spread of choices. If you're really sort of have all of your eggs in one basket and you apply to 5 universities that have exactly the same entry grades, fingers crossed it will work out, but all of your eggs in one basket is a risky move. Try and spread all of your choices across a wide variety. You might have one really aspirational offer. You might have one offer that you think, I'm 100% going to meet these grades, no matter what. And then a few in the middle that are ranging different scale. This will mean that when you get your offers back, you'll have the fullest opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to shoot for that one. And I'm going to have this as my insurance, and be confident knowing that when you're looking at these choices, that you have places that you're going to be happy going to study, courses that you're happy doing. And that's the best advice there. If you're looking at deferred entry, also worth noting is if you are applying directly for deferred entry, many universities will allow you to apply for deferred entry off the bat. If you're going to tell them what you're doing, what do you plan to do? And again, I understand in the current situation, it's really hard to plan in advance if that's something that you're doing. But just make sure that you have, if not a fully fledged plan, that you can talk about things that you might want to do. It's not really worth mentioning or saying in the current circumstances, given everything that's going on. But traditionally, the example that we give is that if you say you're going on a skiing holiday gap year for a year, perhaps that's going to be looked at less favorably than if you were to go away and work in industry for a year or whatever it might be. Again, in the current circumstances, it doesn't need to be quite so rigid. You don't have to have a fully fledged plan, as things can change at the drop of a hat. But certainly where you can think about these things in advance, that will always serve you well. And speaking of the current circumstances, it is worth noting that if you have been sort of affected, extenuating circumstances, many universities, St Andrews included, do have a contextual admissions policy. Because you are limited in the number of characters and space that you have in your personal statement, generally the advice is, wherever possible, include it in the academic reference. If you really want to let the universities know about anything in specific detail, you can also include it in the personal statement, and typically you can send in additional documentation as well to the universities. But certainly putting things in the academic reference or the teacher's reference in the first instance is a really great way of reserving your word count for things that you want to talk about academically, while also alerting the universities to your specific circumstances. And there's a whole range of things that you can let us know about. And certainly many universities are happy for you to get in touch with their student services department ahead of time as well. If you anticipate, if there's any recurring sort of issues that you're facing that you want to alert the universities to as well. And the student services, at least from St Andrews' point of view, but generally speaking across the board at all universities, are more than happy to sort of confidentially speak with you about your the issues that you're facing and how the university in the future might be able to support you. So looking forward, and things to sort of hopefully get excited about, and things to prepare for in terms of the application process. Get involved in as many sort of activities and responsibilities as you possibly can. And again, in the current situation, as I've already said, you'll probably be sick to death of me saying this, don't panic about it being anything too major, about anything that involves, that you're not comfortable with, or don't panic about the fact that the activities and things available might not be, as plentiful as they once were. Wherever possible, if you're interested, if you can see any transferable skills that you think might be able to aid you going forward, at the very least, for personal development reasons, I would definitely encourage it. But again, it might just give you something to talk about, give you that extra boost or that little bit of motivation in your personal statement, or in the application process going further. And one thing that is quite a useful thing that you can do is many universities will have the ability to get in contact with current university students. For example, on the St Andrews webpage, if you type in Ask a Student, you can get in touch with them. But it means that you can really sort of get a feel for what it's like either on campus or at the university, what it's like to study certain subjects. But in some cases, you might even have the opportunity to sort of shadow current students or attend virtual sessions ran by universities either over the summer or in other sort of break periods as well. And that goes on to sort of the other part of the current situation. And one of the perhaps major benefits that has come out of the pandemic is that there is a huge wealth of online courses and lectures and other things being put forward. And I know, again, learning online sort of all day, every day can get quite tiring, and we understand that as well. But if there are things that you're really interested in and you can power through the screen fatigue, there's so many MOOCs and online courses and public lectures, from short 5-minute snippets to crash course videos on YouTube, all the way through to full MOOCs and online courses that you can take. It has expanded so exponentially over the course of the pandemic that pretty much no matter what you're interested in, there's likely now something online, from a short snippet to a long course, that you'd be able to get involved in. And that is a really great way to sort of really heighten your passion to get involved in the subject in different ways. And again, work experience if you can find it, but don't panic too much. Music, sports, all of these other things as well. Typically, again, trickier to do online, but where you can, absolutely amazing. But the thing I always think is perhaps an underrated part of things to sort of start thinking about and to do is to just really talk to as many people as possible. Teachers, careers advisors, even your parents and friends. These are the people who know you best, who know what you're looking forward to, and oftentimes can reveal things about either your application or about the whole process, or even your course choice. You name it. Chat to them and they'll be able to walk you through and sort of give you advice as well. So to sort of recap, read around your subject, read into the course, read into the universities, make sure everything is absolutely tickety-boo and that you're really sort of on course for something that you enjoy at a place you want to be. Don't rush into it. That's probably the most key point out of all of this, is give yourself time to draft and redraft, and of course keep to all school internal deadlines as well. Giving yourself time, thinking about things early, all of these types of things. Again, it sounds fairly obvious, but it's too late to think about it. If you leave it too late, it really can sort of negatively impact. So don't leave it too late. Start thinking about it early. Even attending something like this is absolutely fantastic. It shows you're really wanting to get on top of things. Give yourself time, do the research, and you'll be on to a winner, no doubt. So almost to the end of this general sort of section is many universities have their application process solely through UCAS, but there are a number, and perhaps an increasing number, who are doing some form of interview. So if you are required to do an interview, there are some things to consider. If so, what is the style of the interview? Is it likely to be an individual or a group interview? And again, practice makes perfect. If you know that you're going to be involved in an interview, make sure that you're doing mock interviews. Make sure that if you're doing group interviews, don't practice individual interviews solely. Try and expose yourself to as many of these opportunities as possible. And just a few things to bear in mind if this is something, and again, especially if it's going to be a virtual interview, there's a few things that you can bear in mind, such as making sure that the camera and microphone work and that they're at the correct level, either volume or even sort of height-wise. You don't want them looking at your nose or looking at the top of your head. Make sure it's at the right level, and that you've got a clean sort of background as well. Body language wise, make sure that you're not it can be quite easy if you're doing it virtually to sort of look at the different screen or whatever it might be. Make sure that you're looking dead on, that you're not fidgeting, all of these types of things. And don't be afraid to ask questions. It's always one of those sort of misconceptions about interviews that you should sort of only answer when spoken to and all of these types of things. You can think up your own questions, and don't be afraid of who's asking you the questions as well. You can ask them to repeat them, you can ask them to rephrase if you don't quite understand, and certainly ask your own questions as well. But don't ask really obvious questions. If you can find it on the website, or it's painfully obvious, when things start, that's probably less of a good idea than a well thought out question as well. So that really sort of concludes the first part about applications in general, and hopefully that was.
Alasdair, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm going to give you a chance to just take a breath, because that was amazing. That was a Herculean. You have talked pretty much uninterrupted there. Have a sip of tea. Half an hour. That was fantastic, and getting quite a few questions coming through. So while you just take a little beat there, I think a lot of people are obviously trying to work out how they can bolster their application, because, as you rightly pointed out, we haven't got that work experience now. There's less opportunity now for people to get out. And I know that you talked an awful lot about the MOOCs and the reading and all of the other things. But if you were to come down to 3 things that they should really do, if you can't get out there and get your work experience, if you're going to say, right, 3 things, what 3 things can you do right now that will give real leverage or real purchase or real heft to an application? What would you suggest?
So again, I hope it doesn't sound too obvious, but where you can read outside of the core curriculum in terms of the materials that you're looking at, that is probably absolutely number one. When we're looking at personal statements and we're looking at applications, where we can see genuine passion and enthusiasm that goes beyond the sort of the core curriculum, that can be really quite compelling. And again, we know in the circumstances, if you're wanting to go out to museums or all of these kind of things that otherwise that you would do, it's tricky, it's hard. But being able to look online perhaps and find a book that was referenced in your textbook and go above and beyond and have a look at that would absolutely be number one. Number 2 would be, it doesn't have to be just reading or just work experience. When you're looking at what subjects to apply for, as I said, they need to be something that you enjoy. So if it's something that you've heard, something that you've seen, all of these kind of things, people often think, well, if I've seen something on TV or whatever, that's what's that got to do with anything? But that could be why you want to take your subject, or it could have made you think about something in a certain way. And crucially, what have you learned from that? That can be really quite compelling as well in a personal statement. And in terms of the actual application itself and all of these other things, again, as I said, sort of screen fatigue is real and it's hard, but where you can do these online, other sort of online things to bolster your application, I think that sort of in third, really behind those other 2, would be the third thing to sort of think about.
That's great. Let's say that just when you were talking there, one thing that struck me, if in their application, rather than just sort of being passive absorbers of the information, if they were to do something online that was accessible, so if they were to create a video, a vlog or a blog or anything like that, if they were to link off to that in their application, what are the chances that an admissions tutor might follow that link?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I would say I would say certainly do so if that is something that you've gone and done. I mean, you can talk about it in detail too. If you've made a blog, if you've made web content, be it video, podcast, otherwise, whatever you've done, if you've actively made something and want to demonstrate that is how you've done your engagement, certainly I would encourage you to put that in. I don't see there's any reason not to.
Great. And then one last question, which I think might be for the mums and dads out there who are watching, and there's a few. You mentioned extenuating circumstances on the way through there. Now, this is a very technical question. Perhaps we should take it in more detail later. But is there not a case that everybody right now is essentially in a position whereby they can do so? At what point does this sort of tip into something that might be relevant in the context? Everybody, as you pointed out, and as we all know, we're all going through a very peculiar position, peculiar set of affairs right now. What represents extenuating circumstances when everybody is suffering thus?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Generally speaking, if there is anything that you want to let us know about universities in general, if you've been impacted in a certain way, and I mean, I guess I should begin by saying that we're not, as I said earlier, we're not reading these blind in terms of personal statements or applications. We understand, everyone has been impacted by this in some way or another. But the personal, the reference especially, but perhaps the personal statement as well. If there have been anything that's impacted you specifically, you can let us know about that. It's whether you have to include it or you want to include it as well. It really does come down to your specific circumstances. But certainly, if you feel that you've been impacted in a certain way and you want to let us know about it, we won't know about it otherwise beyond the general situation that we find ourselves in. So if you do want to let us know about it, certainly I'd encourage that, either contacting the universities directly or, as I said, the teacher's reference.
That's great, and thank you for that. And then just very quickly to the people who are listening, in the terms of extenuating circumstances, just the sooner you let us know, the sooner we can advise people like Alasdair and people on the other side. So get that information together. If you have got specific information, specific data, specific letters from doctors or anybody else, keep those in a file, have them ready to present, because it's I think there's going to be a lot of people in that position. We've got a few more little questions about personal statements that I can probably field later. So Sam, I'll definitely come back to you on those. Are you ready to move into the next phase, Alasdair? Because I think these
absolutely
guys, they can hear from me any day of the week. So this is your event. I'm going to back out. Again, moderating the questions as they come through. Thank you very much indeed. And back to you to tell them all about Scotland. And if you mention anything at all from Saturday, I'm just going to end the broadcast right now. Although I do appreciate somebody showing Andy Farrell what a fly half should actually do. Right. No.
Well, beyond the rugby, then I hopefully will be able to talk about sort of Scotland more generally and why you might be considering it as sort of a higher education destination. So, as I said earlier, I'll go through some things that hold true and talk about Scotland more generally, and then I'll finish off by talking about St Andrews specifically as well. But I mean, the first thing about Scotland that will hopefully become pretty quickly evident by these pictures is its landscape and location. It is an absolutely beautiful place to spend some time. Quite unique features. You can see here the Glenfinnan Viaduct. Any Harry Potter fans will no doubt recognise this, but it's really easy to get here from pretty much all of the universities around Scotland, and the Highland is a wonderful place to spend some time. But equally, it's not just all rugged scenery. You have the large cities of both Glasgow and Edinburgh, which again, no matter which university you end up in Scotland, it's pretty much a train ride away to get to either of these, and you can get here really quite quickly from many different places. So you can find yourself on any of the absolutely picturesque isles. I always think this one looks more like a Caribbean beach than it does a Scottish isle. No doubt it's a bit colder, but certainly you have these crystal blue seas and lovely sands as well, including sort of quite remote to get to them. If you want some peace and quiet to write a dissertation or a thesis, certainly you can find it. But equally, you have the hustle and bustle of all of the cities nearby, wherever you end up, or perhaps you might be in them, depending on which universities you find yourself studying at, including the fantastic Fringe Festival that happens. And of course, it couldn't be a picture slideshow without Highland Cow as well. But here is a list of all of the universities sort of dotted around Scotland as well. And you can see that, especially in the cities, there are quite often many different universities within them as well. And again, when I was talking about, a whole spread of universities, you have a whole spread of different universities, from sort of practical to, ancient universities, you name it, Scotland has it. And there's a huge variety on here, with often quite specific course content in many of them as well. So when you're looking at different sort of universities in and around Scotland, there are a few things that stand out why you might wish to consider it beyond its location. The first is that we've been at the higher education game for quite a while. St Andrews was founded in 1413, but many of the universities in Scotland fall into this sort of ancient university category. And there are these 18 universities, not just the ancient, but the truly modern as well. So pretty much no matter what course you're looking at, course specifics aside, likelihood is that you'll find somewhere here that might suit your needs. But equally, perhaps one of the most important parts about Scottish degrees and how they work is their flexible degree structure. It really sets Scottish degrees and higher education in Scotland really quite apart, I think, from many other places around the world. And especially if you're unsure about which subject to apply for, it can really provide you with a great opportunity to narrow down your choices as you go. So I'm going to talk about the degree structure here from the St Andrews point of view. All of the slides that are about to come up in terms of subject 1, 2, 3, and all of these types of things are the St Andrews degree structure, but broadly speaking, both the 4-year and the flexible degree structure follow, most of the universities in Scotland follow this structure. So hopefully this will help. And if you do have any further sort of follow-up questions for specific universities, I would definitely encourage you to have a look on their respective websites, and you'll be able to find the specific structure. But generally speaking, there are things that hold true, such as that it's 4 years in total rather than perhaps the expected 3. But in those 4 years, you don't just study one subject. In your first 2 years, you take multiple, typically 3. And it's only by the time you get to your 3rd year that you'll then specialize down into 1 or perhaps 2 of those subjects. And it's that subject or subjects that you'll end up graduating in. So you get a whole range of flexibility in your first few years. And it's only by the time you get to your 3rd year, having taken them for a couple more years, that you then decide what you want to graduate in. So the best way to explain this is through a couple of examples. So this follows roughly an arts and humanities pathway. So this person applied for ancient history. That's what they'd taken history at school. That's what they were interested in. So they applied through UCAS for ancient history and they were accepted for ancient history. However, once they arrive, they then pick up 2 other subjects. So in this case, this person had taken French at school. So French was subject 2, and they'd never taken philosophy before, but they wanted to give it a go. So philosophy forms subject 3. Now, even though they applied for ancient history, that's what they're accepted on, it isn't major minor. You spend exactly the same amount of time on all 3 of your subjects. Your time is split a third, and they all have the same weighting. In your 2nd year, typically, you'll study 3 more subjects. They can be the same 3, or you can tweak them slightly. This person really enjoyed French and philosophy as well as ancient history, so they continue with the same 3. But by the time they got to their 3rd year, they thought, actually, ancient history is what I enjoy the most. So they did away with French and philosophy and focused solely on ancient history. And so for the 3rd and 4th year, 100% of their time then is spent on ancient history, and they'd come out with a degree in ancient history. However, the beauty of the Scottish degree structure with this added flexibility is the fact that you can absolutely change your degree structure in that 3rd year. So equally, this person could have thought, even though I applied for ancient history, I'm really, really enjoying French and philosophy, so that's what I want to graduate in. So at that 3rd year juncture, they can change their degree and end up graduating in French and philosophy. Equally, they could have graduated in just French, just philosophy, ancient history and French, ancient history and philosophy, any combination of these 3 subjects. And around 40% or so of our art students do change the degree that they come in on. So it really is quite common and really quite easy to do so. It's worth noting that at this sort of point, the joint degree at the end doesn't mean that they have double the amount of work to do. It simply means their time is split 50-50. If you're looking at a science subject, it works ever so slightly different in so much as you still typically do 3 subjects in your first year. This person did biology, chemistry, and statistics. But in your second year, you drop down to 2, mainly because you have lab work and more practical work. It takes up quite a bit more of your time. So typically you drop down to 2 before again specializing down into your third year. But again, this person could have done just statistics, just biology, or perhaps even could have combined them in some way too. So this degree structure, while an extra year, it's not just an extra year for the sake of it. It gives you this opportunity to perhaps try subjects you might not have had the opportunity to study before. Or if you're in a bind and you're not entirely sure which subject you enjoy the most, it gives you the opportunity to study multiple and make your sort of informed decision a bit later down the line in that sort of third year or so. So here is a list of all of the different subjects that are offered by St Andrews. And again, this subject list will vary university by university. But generally speaking, at least at St Andrews, the different subjects that you take should really fall in the same area. So either the Faculty of Arts or Science, but there are some that you can take either way with us that we call cross-faculty subjects. But again, university dependent, it does vary slightly, but generally speaking, in all of the universities in Scotland, it follows this structure and gives you that added flexibility to take these subjects and sort of decide a bit later. So there are some advantages as well as some obvious disadvantages to this structure. So the 4 years, it is 4 years. I'll talk about the disadvantages first. And it doesn't suit everyone. I'm not going to pretend that it does. If you know 100% what you want to study, then a 3-year degree where you're laser focused on that degree might be more advantageous to you. But most of the time, at least myself included, we find that people are quite interested in a variety of different subjects, and having that opportunity to study them at university level for just that little bit longer and choose a bit later down the line really does allow you to explore what you're interested in, and perhaps even try new subjects and gain a broad range of skills across these subjects before knuckling down and focusing in laser on one of these subjects. And we do see that this can be quite attractive to employers as well. If you've taken things at university level across the board, and indeed just going forward in terms of finding out what you enjoy, if you are torn on what subjects to choose for, it just gives you that extra bit of time, that flexibility to choose what you enjoy and graduate in that or those subjects. So that really sort of concludes part 2 in terms of the Scottish element, in terms of Scottish universities. And I'll now quickly just finish off by talking about St Andrews a bit more briefly, if that's okay.
Well, of course it is. Again, I'll give you an opportunity to take a breath. Just coming back to the, there we go, just making some notes there. Just coming back to the subjects that you can take alongside your major. I think you said that they should all come from the same faculty. So if you're doing philosophy, then you probably shouldn't pick up metallurgy or something along those lines.
Yeah, so it varies university by university. At least St Andrews wise is that if you apply, say, for art history, which is in the Faculty of Arts, the other subjects typically that you should be taking should fall either within the Faculty of Arts or any of those cross-faculty subjects. Likewise, if you're taking chemistry, it should really fall within the Faculty of Science or the cross-faculty subjects. If what you want to apply for is, example, economics or management or whatever it might be, and it's one of these cross-faculty subjects, when you apply, you'll either apply for it as an arts degree or a science degree, and there's a slightly separate UCAS code. Course content-wise is exactly the same. The only difference is the other subjects that you'll take alongside it. But
Right.
Equally, there are some exceptions to this. If you take chemistry, but you have a real passion for film, timetabling allowing, you might be able to take film studies, for example, or vice versa.
Okay, but you'd still wind up with a degree in chemistry.
Typically, yeah. If you were to take any cross-faculty subjects, you'd be allowed to do that for the first couple of years, but you wouldn't be able to graduate in it typically.
Right, good. Sam, I hope that answers your question. Are you ready for the final pitch here? This is when we talk about the home team. Lovely. I'm out of here. Thank you very much.
Great. So I won't spend too long talking about St Andrews. I feel like I've already spoken at length about the application process and Scottish unis in general. But I'll quickly just go over St Andrews and some of the things, at least in terms of what we've been talking about why it's a great place to be and why I'm still here. So its location, certainly, I talked about all of the different universities around Scotland. Location-wise, St Andrews is in quite a privileged position of being able to be up in the sort of Cairngorms of the north, Aberdeen, Inverness within a few hours, but equally you can be in Edinburgh within the hour or Glasgow within about 2 hours or so. There's really good transport links backwards and forwards, both to London along the sort of east coast with the train line, or indeed in sort of normal times airports. There's really good connectivity from Edinburgh across many UK airports as well. But equally, if you're driving, it's fairly simple backwards and forwards as well, both northwards or downwards, depending on where you want to go. So even though St Andrews is, a small little town, you can be in any of these major cities. Edinburgh, for example, within about an hour or so. Dundee's the nearest city, and that's only about 20 minutes away. So you can be in a large city really quite quickly, but you do feel slightly sort of in a lovely location. You're right on the coast, and you're not smack bang in the middle of a city. You are slightly removed, but certainly easy to get there. And of course, you can see the flight times for across Europe as well. People often use St Andrews as a stepping stone and meeting people all across the world. It's not just Europe, but St Andrews really is quite an international place. Around sort of 40% or so of our students are outside are sort of from outside of the UK. So it is quite an international little place, quite a cosmopolitan, busy and bustling little place here too. So I won't spend too long on this aerial slide. Suffice to say, this is quite a good overview of St Andrews and its location. So you can see in the middle that there are 3 main streets, and they're quite easy to remember because you have Market Street in the middle, which is where all the shops are, supermarkets, chemists, high street shops, usual fare. And to either side, you have North Street and South Street, where again, there's cafes, restaurants, but equally lots of university buildings. It's what makes St Andrews quite a special place. People often ask, what's the campus like? And strictly speaking, it's not a campus university, but in many ways it feels like one because the town is so small and so highly integrated with the town itself. So you can see the 3 circles that have come on screen. They represent 3 different almost the 3 different faculties in a lot of ways. To the right of the screen, you have our main library, surrounded by which are most of our arts and humanities-based subjects and departments. At the top of the screen, you can see a sort of round building, and next to it the circle, which is where all of our science buildings are held. And to the left of the screen, you can see where some of our new music centre is, but it's St Mary's Quad, which is where you'll find neuroscience or divinity and psychology and subjects like that. For scale, to get from the top left where that circle is to the right circle, which is where the art subjects are, you're looking at around a 20-25 minute walk. So St Andrews is quite a compact place. If you walk 40 minutes in any direction, typically you're likely to end up in the sea or a farmer's field or perhaps a golf course. So it is quite a compact place. You don't need public transport. You don't need a car. You can walk everywhere. But there are buses and things if it finds itself raining, or at least on a day like this if it's pelting down with snow. Location-wise, it's absolutely a privileged position right on the coast. You have 3 lovely beaches, all of which play a part in some of the student traditions, such as just lovely walks, bonfire barbecues, or indeed traditions such as May Dip, which I'll touch upon later. And you can't talk about St Andrews without talking about the golf course. If any of you are budding keen golfers, you get an absolutely fantastic student discount. If you're anything like me and golf isn't your cup of tea quite so much, there's a crazy mini golf or a driving range up there. So you can officially say you've played golf at St Andrews as well, which is quite a good cheat if it's not your thing. And again, sort of St Andrews more generally, the town, like many of the other universities in Scotland, it's a historic town. It's been here for the best part of 1,000 years, but what makes St Andrews quite a special place is the university has been here since 1413. So they are really joined at the hip. They're really integrated, as you can see from that aerial slide. But even in terms of the community and the residents, of the 22,000 people who live here, around half of that number are staff and students at any given time. It creates a really lovely, strong sense of community. Out and about, typically, you're bumping into people left, right, and centre. You're only ever about 1 person removed from anyone else. But it's worth noting that in these current situations, sort of circumstances, that community has really come into a league of its own, with people being able to sort of still meet people sort of virtually online in small groups and really have the St Andrews community behind them. The limited number of students, is a relatively small cohort and a relatively small university, means that you do get to know people really quite well, quite quickly, and you still manage to forge these bonds, both with your lecturers, but as well with the community sort of more widely. And all of this creates a sort of, in normal and unusual circumstances, a lovely, safe and supportive place to be. as well as the lovely location. I won't dwell too long on league tables. I said before earlier, they can be a really great starting block when you're looking at which universities to go to. But certainly, as I said earlier, when you're looking at the process and doing your research, looking at each individual university's offerings in terms of courses and all of the other things, going to open days virtually and otherwise is absolutely the way to go. But we do rank quite highly in them, first and second in the UK, according to The Guardian this year. And at least crucially for me, first for student academic experience. I think that, as well as sort of some of the student survey results that we've had in the previous years, really more than anything tell you the kind of place St Andrews is. Not only are you going to have a world-class experience education-wise here, but you can have a blast while doing it. And in terms of studying at St Andrews, it really does lend itself to these small class sizes. You have a 12-to-1 student staff ratio across the board, which means even your large lectures typically are quite small in comparison to other universities. But generally, the teaching works a bit like a funnel, where you have a series of large lectures each week where, much as you can see on screen, take the typical lecture format, and they're complemented by a series of smaller tutorials and seminars and lab work if you're doing a science subject. All of this means that you have really good access to your lecturers and you get to know them on quite a personal level. In your first couple of years, it might mean if you bump into them in the street, they'll sort of be waving and saying hello to you. By the time you get to your third and fourth year, if you're anything like me, you'll be knocking on their door to have a cup of tea and sort of chat about what I'm struggling with, or what I'm looking forward to, what my next steps are. You really do forge these bonds with these lecturers and faculty staff. And again, these small sort of tutorials and seminar sizes in the circumstances we find ourselves in have meant that it has adapted really quite neatly onto the online learning aspect as well. So you have these small classes ran sort of online that you can interact with, and the feedback we're getting from students is generally positive about how these are being ran and how it still gives you that sort of one-on-one interaction with the faculty staff and other peers as well. And just quickly, in terms of class time, the main difference between whether you're looking at 12 or 24 hours is whether you're looking at an arts or a science-based subject. Because of that added lab work that I mentioned earlier, the lab work really does add a few hours on each week. But that's not to say if you're taking an arts degree, you've got less work to do, perhaps far from it. As an arts graduate, I can confirm you still have lots of reading, lots of things to be getting on with as well. And then finally, it's not just all about academics, it's about the place and the things that you can get up to. And life in St Andrews really is quite a weird and wonderful place to spend some time. And no small part of that, beyond the normal music, the sport, the student societies and clubs that you might expect at university, part of what makes St Andrews special, I think, is our traditions. You can see me here in various stages, from me in my first year dressed as a penguin. Clearly purple's a theme because I'm wearing it on the second picture as well, with my family. So that's me and my family in first year, and me with my family in third year there. And that's one of the many traditions that happens in St Andrews, where it all sort of culminates in what's called Raisin Weekend. You have a family, and it's worth mentioning at this point, all of the traditions are optional. But as a first year, you're adopted by a third year typically, or perhaps you might adopt them. And you'll have a whole sort of semester, give or take, of getting to know them, having these another circle of friends, another sort of person who's been in St Andrews a little while to ask all of those questions you don't know who to ask to. And it all culminates in Raisin Weekend, which that itself culminates with the largest foam fight in Europe, which if you haven't seen any videos or pictures of, would highly encourage you to do so. But equally, there are things like pier walks that happen every week. And May Dip, which is my favorite tradition of all, which happens on East Sands Beach, where on the 1st of May, as soon as the sun pokes its head above the horizon, you'll run into the North Sea, you dip your head under for a few seconds, and you run back out again. And it is absolutely freezing. It is really, really cold, but you'll never, ever forget it. And it's one of those things that when you inevitably bump into other people from St Andrews, because you find them sort of dotted across the world, one of the first things they'll always ask is, what traditions did you do? Did you do May Dip, etc.? Getting towards the end of the sort of PowerPoint here, there's just a couple more things that I want to talk about. Again, in the sort of current circumstances, there's a lot of, I know, anxiety about sort of degrees and coming to university, and indeed the sort of prospects afterwards. And from St Andrews' point of view, 96% of our graduates are in work or further study within 6 months. And that's a statistic that has been sort of relatively constant over the past few years. So a St Andrews degree really can sort of help you on the other side in terms of, be it further study or your dream career, whatever it might be. And no small part of that is down to the the dedicated career service that can give you one-on-one advice. But certainly if that is something you're worried about, again, when you're looking at all of your other universities, definitely have a look what the career prospects and where graduates end up in. Quite often you can find tables and charts of where graduates have often found themselves, be it sort of employment wise or otherwise, and it can give you a really good overview and indication of, if you study for a certain degree, where graduates have gone on to. And in the St Andrews perspective, we even have a sort of it's called Careers Connect. It's sort of a LinkedIn almost specifically for St Andrews graduates, where you can reach out to graduates who've signed up in these various positions and sort of ask them about their experiences and how they got there. Lots of things like this to really sort of help you on your way. And then finally, before I sort of hand back over, is that we're here, and universities in general are here to provide as much advice and support as possible. And that can be, while you're a student at university, don't be shy to ask questions, to go to the Career Centre, to go to student services, whatever it might be. We are here to help. But even at this stage, when you're thinking about going to university, admissions staff across the board, pretty much all universities are here to help wherever we can. And if you do think of any further questions, if you're struggling in any way, always just reach out to us, either via email typically, or over phone, or whatever it might be, and we'll endeavour wherever possible to sort of help you with any sort of further questions or issues that might arise as part of that application process. Don't be shy, always say hello if you can. And with that, that's our contact email address on screen, just there, if you'd like to reach out. If you have any follow-up questions, by all means, please do give us an email at admissions. Thank you.
Alasdair, thank you. What a huge amount of information there to take on board. It really is absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. You've covered all of the questions I've had. You've covered all of the questions that have been coming through. So thank you very much. While you get your breath back, perhaps if you could just say very, very briefly, I know you touched on it, how, and I think this is something that everyone's going to want to know, how much you can answer, I don't know. What has life been like this last year for the kids who are up there at St Andrews? Because obviously they're out now. I guess they're sitting around waiting. Now, this is not, I should say, this is not something that's specific to St Andrews. All of our undergraduates are in exactly the same position. Can you help explain what's happening now, and perhaps what sort of advice you're giving your undergraduates?
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend it's been a walk in the park. It's certainly been sort of a challenging time for pretty much everyone involved. But as I sort of mentioned and alluded to earlier, the St Andrews sort of community and spirit, I think, is one of the, regardless of whether we're online or in person, sort of here or everywhere, it is one of those things that really binds the community no matter where you are together. And I think that has really lent itself in terms of all of the ups, of the downs, of the here and the not here, and all of these kind of things. We've had blended learning sort of since last September. We call it dual mode delivery in terms of online and in person, where it's sort of safe and appropriate to do so. So our undergraduates have had some in-person teaching last semester, and have had mostly online teaching this semester, and last semester for that matter. But the small class sizes that I mentioned in person, again, do translate quite neatly in a lot of ways to the online platform as well. You still have the ability to get to know your lecturers, to sort of chat with them, and from a sort of fundamental standpoint, they've been recorded. They've had tutorials at sort of weird hours of the day to sort of accommodate for different time zones wherever you might find yourself, and all of these kind of things. So the education side of things, I think, has really been quite thorough, and the feedback we're getting from our undergraduates has been overwhelmingly positive. And in terms of sort of advice that we're giving to undergraduates, is to really sort of fundamentally take care of yourself. It can be really quite challenging in these circumstances to either feel alone or to sort of get screen fatigue, get bogged down. Though there are a variety of different points of contact from either student services, or even with us specifically, you have your academic advisor, you have points in student services, all of these kind of things. Don't be afraid to reach out if you find yourself struggling, and we're not here to catch you out. People often get worried about assignments or coursework or all of these kind of things. That isn't our aim. Our aim is to make sure that you're learning and that you're having this educational experience. So that more than anything, I think, is probably my best advice. If you do find yourself struggling academically or otherwise, always just sort of touch base and reach out wherever you can.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. That's taken us over the hour. You must be exhausted. You've talked nonstop. We've got your email address there. I'll make sure that goes into the chat. And it remains only on behalf of myself and everybody else here who has been listening in. Thank you ever so much, Alasdair. That was absolutely brilliant. We hope that we'll hope you'll do it again next year. Although hopefully that time we'll be able to get you down. You can have a look at Stowe. We can get you dinner, and you can have a nice chat with the kids rather than with a camera. So once again, thank you ever so much. That was a fantastic presentation. And on behalf of everybody here, thank you very much, and see you next year.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.